A taken baby found 17 years later in a selfie. Mornay and Celeste Nurse lived in Cape Town. She gave birth to a little healthy baby girl, Zephanie. She was still at the hospital 3 days later, and then that is when the worst thing possible that could happen. When she woke up, there was a nurse in her bedroom asking her over and over again where this baby was. And that is when the hospital called the police and the search began. They actually did find several things around this hospital that led them to believe that this was connected to the disappearance of Zephanie. That is when a tunnel was searched, and this tunnel in this hospital was meant for women who were going into labor to have direct access from the outside of the hospital to the maternity ward. But this also meant that if they could get in easily, they could get out easily. She remembered another nurse coming in right before she fell asleep, but now she didn't see this nurse anywhere. But there was another woman who had a very concerning story. She actually walked in to her bedroom to see this exact nurse holding her baby, and she kind of asked her, "What are you doing?" And the nurse said, "Oh, your baby was just crying, so I was comforting her and just helping you out." And the nurse left the baby and left the room. The family began to believe that she had been kidnapped by a woman who had a perfect plan to get away unnoticed. Investigators had found something in this tunnel. There was a pillow in there, and this pillow was thought to be what this nurse used under her shirt to make it appear as though she looked pregnant. The years went by and Zephanie wasn't found. Celeste and Mornay actually went on to have 3 more children together, and they also would end up divorced. They had always known in the back of their mind that Zephanie was out there somewhere growing up with somebody else. Their other children were growing up not knowing who their big sister was, but one of their children actually knew a lot more than she could have ever expected. It was now 2015, and their second born was a girl named Cassidy, and she was now 14 years old and going into Zwaski High School as a freshman. She began to make friends really quickly, and one of which was a high school senior who was 17-year-old Michelle Solomon. They instantly connected and began to hang out all the time. And that is when people who would see them together started asking if they were sisters. Once Cassidy's parents heard about this, they wanted to know much more. That's when they were shown a selfie that Cassidy had taken with Michelle, and they were in complete shock. They were identical. And Cassidy had told them that people kept asking Michelle if she was adopted, and she would laugh it off and tell them not to be crazy. But Cassidy's parents weren't just going to stop there. They didn't believe that it was too crazy of a theory that she had been adopted. The Nurse family had contacted investigators, and they had begun to dig into the Solomons and who they were, and what they found caused 2 social workers to end up at their school talking to Michelle Solomon. Michelle was being told about a child named Zephanie Nurse, and that she might know the identity of this newborn baby. Michelle was very confused. She didn't know the identity. She had no idea what they were talking about, and they asked her, "Where were you born?" She said, "My mom told me it was about 20 minutes away from here at Retreat Hospital." Investigators quickly informed her that they had looked into this, and there was no records of her being born at this hospital. Michelle said that she would do the DNA test that they were offering because she was positive that it would be negative and they would end all of this and go back to their normal lives. Michelle said that she had a wonderful childhood. She lived in Lavender Hill in Cape Town. This was the same town that the Nurse family lived in, and she said that her mother was always there for her 24/7, and her father, she said, was her rock, her hero. So at 17 years old, she was going in to take a test that could change her life forever, but she didn't believe that it would. The DNA test came back saying that Michelle Solomon was in fact Zephanie Nurse, that her biological sister was her best friend Cassidy, and that she had been kidnapped at birth. Now, of course, the Nurse family were ecstatic, and they knew that they had found their baby 17 years later. But for Michelle, this was a complete and utter shock. She was being taken away from the only family she had ever known. Social workers took her into custody, and she was told she wouldn't be going back home because her mother was being arrested. Michelle began to feel this time that her life was out of control. She wanted her mother, and she wanted to ask her, what she did, if any of this was true, and this was the person that she relied on. And now everyone was saying that that person was a liar. One part of her wanted to run away with Lavona and Michael, but she also wanted to get close to her biological parents, so she was torn between the people who raised her in love and the people who conceived her in love and had yearned to love her for 17 years. Even though they were still strangers, she was going to try to show some sort of happiness, but part of her still wanted to be with the family she had known. But Michelle did quickly get comfortable with this new family, especially with Cassidy, since she was already a big part of her life, being her best friend. Lavona was still in custody, but Michael still needed to be questioned because they didn't know whether he had any part in this kidnapping or not. Michelle was actually in the room when he would be taken in to be talked to, and Michael would immediately ask her, "Why are you here? What is happening?" He looked extremely stressed, and that's when he told the police that he didn't do anything and that Michelle was his daughter. He wasn't a part of any of this. He even asked how she could not be his daughter. He began to explain that Lavona had been pregnant, and then she came home with a baby, and he believed that she had just given birth. Now, he was eventually released, and investigators said they didn't believe he knew anything about this kidnapping. Just Lavona would be taken to trial. Investigators believed that Lavona had been pregnant, but she had a miscarriage and decided to go and steal a child instead of coming to terms with the fact that she lost her own. In March of 2016, Lavona actually pled not guilty for kidnapping, fraud, and contravening the Children's Act of South Africa. Lavona continued to say that she didn't do anything wrong, but she also talked about having trouble conceiving a child, that she had miscarriages, and was desperate to adopt. Lavona said she didn't kidnap this baby from the hospital, but somebody else might have for her. And Lavona said she was getting a fertility treatment from a woman named Sylvia, who then offered her a full baby. Lavona said she was told that the baby's mother didn't want the baby and was giving it up for adoption. So of course she said she wanted it. Now, investigators searched for Lavona's connection to a woman named Sylvia, and they couldn't find a thing. And you'd think that if she was getting fertility treatment, it would have had to been at a center that has some records that at least showed she was there, but nothing was found. But what they did find was a witness who finally came forward saying that they saw a woman who looked just like Lavona carrying out Zephany that day at the hospital. This woman was brought in to the police station to pick out who this was from a lineup. She immediately picked Lavona. Seeing Lavona at trial, Michelle was really distraught. She struggled to see the person she believed was her mother in handcuffs in a place for criminals, and she didn't know how to process what was being told to her. 6 months later, Lavona was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Michelle was heartbroken about this. She didn't feel like justice was given to her because everyone else saw this woman as a kidnapper, but she saw her as a mother. A few months later, Michelle would actually choose to go see Lavona in prison through a window. And she told her, "By knowing I'm not your blood, that I actually belong to someone else, and that you've robbed them of possibilities and changed my whole destiny, hurt me. How am I supposed to believe your word when you've lied to me, saying that I am your child? You broke your trust with me. You were going to have to come clean if you want to have a relationship with me." Michelle was also pregnant at this time and was crying uncontrollably at the fact that Lavona was in a, prison uniform, and she was just very emotional about the whole thing. But the one thing that she demanded was Lavona to tell her the truth. Instead, Lavona started giving her advice about her pregnancy and told her that she would tell her what happened one day, but not that day. However, she still said that she didn't do it. Lavona is still in prison today, and Michelle lives nearby at the family home with her father that she grew up knowing was her father, Michael. Now, she said that she chose to live with Michael instead of her biological family because both of her parents, her biological parents, were living with family at the time, and she was still learning to bond with them, and she figured, she had the closest bond with Michael, so she stayed with him. My heart breaks for the nurse family because I know that they are probably struggling right now with knowing that they found their daughter, but knowing that it will never be the same as if they raised her. I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye!